Hi, everyone. We are talking to Monique today. Monique, say your last name because I won't be able to say it. I'll
It's
butcher
Garsaud. G-A-R-S. It's like Garso. Garsaud. It's how it's pronounced.
Garsaud. So we are talking to Monique Garsaud. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Monique, but before I read her bio, I'm going to tell you about my experience with Monique. So I met Monique about, I believe it was like a year and a half ago, but I don't pay attention to time, but that's what she'll say. She just said yes. And she came into membership. And I remember because I just kind of move along, but I just remember her being in membership and thinking, oh, this is like a nice light here. There's a spark here, like a lot of members are. So don't take it like she never says that about me. And she asked us about Soul Finder Academy in Messenger. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. This is a new person in membership who wants to join Soul Finder. She may have a different understanding of this story, but this is my experience. So I get to tell it my way. So then she went into Soul Finder Academy, and it was just so great to get to know her because I really get to know people very well in that program. It's much more high touch with me. And then we did a little bit of coaching together, and at that point, Voxer was offered in Soul Finder Academy. We got to know each other via Voxer, which is an app. And I just really loved everything about Monique and what she has to offer. And so we invited her to do a class for membership, and she's a boundaries coach. She's a lot more than just a boundaries coach, and that's what you're going to learn about her today. And I think this is the perfect topic around approaching the holiday season. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation with her because she's somebody who's got very clear boundaries. She's very clear about them. And she's doing a class called Boundaries for Empaths. And empaths need boundaries, whether you are verbally speaking the boundary or you're energetically speaking the boundary, you need a boundary. I was on a team call right before this, and one of my team members was sick, and I was starting to feel physically sick because I pick up the physical energy, and I'm like, boundary. So I'm excited to have this conversation and talk about boundaries for the holidays. But let me tell you a bit about Monique, and then I'm going to give her a minute to talk. When Monique, she went to law school. When she entered law school years ago, she believed the way to happiness was to be a driven, independent woman with a financially successful career. But deep down, a still inner voice told Monique that being a successful lawyer was not her soul's path. And I so can relate to this story. At first, Monique ignored the voice and believed if she pushed herself hard enough, everything would fall into place and the voice would fall silent. As life would have it, this did not work. And Monique became extremely ill and bedridden for several years. Many things she treasured, her home, her finances, relationships, and independence, disappeared. The only thing that remained was the still voice wanting to be set free. As Monique began to peel back the layers of how and why she got sick, her healing abilities emerged, and her love affair with energy healing began. She became a certified energy healer, Reiki master, and certified life coach. Today, Monique shares all she has learned with clients, and she's one of the coaches in Soul Finder Academy as well. She has her own business. She works with people who are at a crossroad in their lives and helps each one tap into something greater than themselves. And if anybody understands that, it's somebody who's been through the evolution themselves in that life, that you could really coach from a place of expertise, experience. So she coaches people into a greater understanding of themselves so they can live a life on their terms without excuses or apologies. Her motto is that not only is anything possible, but everything is possible. Welcome, Monique.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Exciting.
Yeah. I'm so excited. I just really I'm so glad we're finally getting to sit down, even though I know a bit about you, and have this conversation. So before I go into, tell us a little bit about what that moment was like when you were pushing the still voice upside. And that's like a boundary thing, right? Pushing the still voice away, and then you got sick. Just tell us a little bit about that, because we have so many people that relate to that story, and I want them to hear it from your perspective.
Well, in retrospect, it's so easy. Well, it's not so easy, but it is easy now from where I stand to see what was going on. And I had no boundaries. I didn't even know what a boundary was. And I had never really heard of the concept. I certainly did not have boundaries in place because I lived from a space of I was a good person if I gave myself away. I was a good person if I did everything. I was the go-to girl. I mean, I remember the partner for whom I worked and who was my mentor, who I still adore today. But I remember telling everybody, my job in my life is to make his life easier. And he loved it because he lived this fabulous life while I toiled away. I worked, 7 days a week. And I thought that's what really made me valuable.
Yeah.
And once I got sick, and, when you literally are in bed, you have nothing but time to start reviewing your life and to see what decisions you make and all of that. And I learned that what I thought was value and love and all of these notions that are put into us as children was what made me sick. It's because I wasn't living, as Marilyn always talks about, your soul's life and what makes you happy and what brings you joy. And none of it was. It was all of the templates and belief systems that I had learned as a child, whether it was through my family, through my school, through whatever structural hierarchies were in place that tell us how we should behave and what makes us good people.
So it takes that moment to finally hit the wall and stop before you have this understanding of this kind of restrictions that these boundaries that aren't healthy that you've created. Is that true? Is that what happened?
Well, this is what I've learned through boundaries. And it was so fascinating to me because really it was one of the hardest concepts for me to grasp and one of the most challenging for my clients. Boundaries are not restrictive. But we are taught that boundaries are restrictive, particularly as empaths. And that is something, I'm not going to go down the road completely. That would be in the class. But when we start hemming ourselves in, this is what happens. It happens to us energetically. It happens to us physically. So when we really embrace a boundary, and for the sake of our discussion, I'm just going to tell you, when I talk about a boundary, it's really the spaces where we define what we will or will not do, what we will or will not tolerate, and what we will or will not accept. And when we get very clear in those areas, this is what happens. We grow, we expand. And what boundaries do is they give us the ability to step into our light at a different level. And it gives us the gift of the word no. And when we say no, whether it's to a person or to a situation, we are saying yes to ourselves. So this huge expansion happens. So, and that's my invitation to everybody, is to really examine what they think a boundary is. Because when we start to think a boundary is something that's going to keep me safe and it's going to keep me protected, this is what happens to us, particularly energetically, particularly as empaths. So when we see a boundary instead as something that is going to open us up and invite in more of who we are, we just grow. And then so many more things become possible. And so for me, that was a big aha when I changed that understanding of what a boundary could do for me and really what it was and how I didn't have any of that in my life.
So I want to dive deeper into how can you work with boundaries with that understanding? So how can you restructure it, or what's a conversation? Let's start here, Monique. What's a conversation you can have with yourself to even know that that's a boundary and it's possibly restricting you?
Well, this is where our bodies in particular become so important, because our bodies are what we call our barometer of truth. And so our bodies tell us, when we are that in tune with our bodies tell us when a boundary has been crossed. And before I explain that, I just want to also let people know, this is another misconception about boundaries. They do not involve anyone else. No one crosses your boundaries. Your boundaries are yours to own, they're yours to create, and they're yours to maintain. And even though they arise.
That is so good. Say those three things again.
Yes, they're yours to own, they're yours to create, and they're yours to maintain. And I look back in my life and I remember saying, oh, all high and mighty, so-and-so crossed a boundary. Can you believe she said that or she behaved that way and blah, blah, blah. No, absolutely not. I was allowing that to happen because I did not make clear what I was willing to put up with or agree to or whatever. So what happens is when we start, even though our boundaries involve other people and relationships, it's still about us. So it's not about, we are not here to change someone's behavior. That is not what a boundary is about. The people in our lives or even the public, they're entitled to behave and think however they want. But it's up to us to figure out how we respond to that. And whether it's something very simple to something very extreme. And in the boundary coaching that I do, we have like different layers of boundaries. The first one is basically, I call it a baby boundary. It's like a beginner boundary. It's something you would put in place just because it would just make life so much easier. Like, for instance, it drives me nuts when people leave like dirty dishes in the sink. So I'd like to put a boundary in place around doing other people's dishes. But it's not the end of the world. It's not going to harm me. It's not going to really upset my world. I lived, for those of you that know me well, I just separated from living with my 87 and 89-year-old parents. And, it's very difficult to live with elderly people. And, I would come to the sink every day and there's the dishes that my dad has put in because he was used to me cleaning the sink. And, sometimes I'd say it would really be nice if you did it. But if he didn't, who cares? I'm just going to do the dishes. That would be fabulous if he did, but no big deal. But then we move into the second layer of boundaries, which we call just kind of the intermediary. They're really good to have and they make us feel better. And, that could look something like, let me think of what an intermediary boundary, because for me, I have so many, hey, yeah, gee, I know a lot of us are used to the dishes, right? I know. Okay, I'm going to say like politics. I do not enjoy getting into political discussions with people. I don't enjoy being around political discussions. So I have a boundary around that generally I will say, I appreciate your perspective, but I don't want to have that conversation. But again, if they continue, depending upon the circumstances, it is not the end of the world for me, unless they're spewing hate and racism and bigotry and that kind of thing. But if it's just someone venting, I will, sometimes I will just be okay. But when it crosses into the boundaries that are really what we call the non-negotiables, they're the bottom line boundaries. And those are almost harmful in the sense that, like, for instance, I have bottom line boundaries around, being in an abusive relationship or dating someone who is an addict. Those are clear and those are very extreme situations, but I'm very clear about that. And so boundaries show up in our lives in the smallest of ways and in the biggest of ways. But the important thing is that we begin with the smallest of ways. Because even though things seem inconsequential, like the dirty dishes situation, it's getting us comfortable with A, recognizing our triggers, and B, being able to voice them in a loving, kind, caring way. And then C, getting used to other people's discomfort. Because what happens is, particularly in relationships and family, and we'll get to this when we talk about the holidays, because family and holidays are like, what is it, water and oil. I just completely lost my train of thought. Is that, okay, so it's about making other people. So what happens is when we grow up in families, we all take on these personas. So people are used to people behaving in a way. And when you start changing that with your boundaries, it makes people very uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, I just went through this with my entire family because I was always known as the go-to girl, the woman that's going to handle everything for everybody. And they are used to that. And I've had to draw some pretty substantial boundaries this year with my family because of my parents, because of their age, because of dealing with their even they're alive, it's still their estate, all their belongings, blah, blah, blah. And I had to finally leave, physically leave. I left my town for 2 months because I was being expected to do everything. And so I said, the only way for me to stay in my place of truth, to remain healthy, because it was starting to affect my health, was to physically leave, so that they had to figure out, the rest of the family, my siblings, had to figure out what to do with my parents, what to do with their house, and so on and so forth. So it's really important, though, without having the smaller boundaries that I had put in place when I started this work, I never would have been able to say no to my family. I never would have been able to leave town and be like, I'm sorry. I won't even say I'm not sorry, because I'm not sorry. But their discomfort with it is not mine to own. It is not mine to manage. Their anger with me is not mine to manage. Their frustration is not mine to take on. And so many of us, particularly as women, and it's not all women, but particularly as women, we are taught to give ourselves. We are taught to give ourselves and to allow people just to put on us what they want to, because that's, again, it's the caretaker in us, it's the savior, it's the person who wants to make everybody happy. But what we do in those situations is we drain ourselves. We bleed ourselves away. Go ahead, Marilyn. I know you have a question.
Well, no, I have a lot of questions. I'm just making notes, because the first thing, I have way too many questions now, but the first thing
I could go on and on, but
right. No, oh, good. It's such an important conversation. But so let me try to backtrack a second. You said your body tells us when a boundary is being crossed. Yes. So go there for a second, and then we'll continue to go to everything else.
Yes, because this is what's so important, and why it's so, all the people that take us through meditations and teach us about, our body and blah, blah, blah. Our bodies are the place that we live. It is the place where our light exists. So for me, when a boundary is crossed, and again, that is me crossing my own boundary, that is when my light goes out. So I feel it. We all feel it in our bodies, but we all may not know it. But our bodies will tell us, like, for instance, when people think of a boundary that's been crossed, or they think of a relationship or a situation where there's anger or resentment, I want people just to sit in that place, close their eyes, breathe into that anger, and see where in your body that shows up. Because the body always, whatever any repressed feeling we've had, is stored in our body.
Yep.
It just does. And, for those of us that work in the quantum area and in all that, what happens out here ends up in here. It's just the way it works. So when that's what happened to me. I mean, I had stuffed so much crap of denying who I was, of never saying no, of not even recognizing what joy was, and the fear and the anxiety. My body took it all on.
Yeah.
So it was all stored in my body, and that's what happens. So the more we're in relationship to our bodies and understand our bodies, and that is from everything through, again, as empaths, we probably feel a little quicker and a little better than some people, which is a gift, so we can tap in. Oh gosh, that felt really uncomfortable. Oh, my shoulders just went tight, or my stomach really hurt, or all of a sudden I got a back pain. And we all have different tells, but I really recommend that people really work with their body around that, to see next time you get in a situation where you feel really uncomfortable, or you feel anger, or you feel resentment, check in with your body and see where you feel it.
Yeah. The thing is, though, I love that. And I completely agree with that 1000%. It's then there's a belief system around it, which you've already talked about too, because empaths think, oh, I have to do this, or like you said, I have to take care of my family. Or I've met empaths that are like, it's my calling to heal others. I was at a party and there was a situation going on and I got involved in it because it's my healer nature to get involved, and it ruined the party for me. And I was like, you can't do that anymore. So we have to also marry the understanding of the boundaries with the belief system, it feels like.
Absolutely. And as healers, our belief system, at least the people that I've come in contact with and work with, as healers, it's even more entrenched, that belief system of I have to heal. And I really challenge people to take that apart, because we are not here to heal anybody. And the way I describe it, to my clients is that I'm a vessel, my client is a vessel. And when I'm here, when I say I'm here to heal you, this is what happens. My vessel gets constantly poured into your vessel. Your vessel can never fill up because I'm pouring my energy into you. And then my vessel's empty. And yours is just draining. It just wants more and more and more. So what happens is when we put boundaries in place, and as a healer, when I recognize I am there to support you on your journey in the best way I know possible, and to allow you to enter into your own process in the way that's best for you, I will hold your vessel for you, but I will not fill it up. And there's a real distinction between the two. And it goes back to, and Marilyn, I know, you talk about this in SFA and in SAS, it's all of these subconscious beliefs that we take on as children, or, sometimes we come into the world with them as well, whether it's past life, whether all of that, where we have these beliefs that this is how we're loved, this is how we're worthy, this is how we're valued, by giving ourselves away and by trying to save and heal people. And look whether it's gotten healers through the, lifetime of healing. So, I mean, now more than ever, where we are in our evolution and our incarnation of humans and as healers, like for me, it's such an amazing time to be a healer, but to also have strong boundaries, because you become, at least from my perspective, you become a stronger healer when you've got your boundaries in place, because you are not depleting your own vessel.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things you said is, and the most important thing is, we're responsible for everything. So I want to go to that because I want to move into the holidays in a second, but there's a couple more questions that came up. So if a family member, I guess we could do this now. Like, I had an experience with a brother years ago who said something really rude and distasteful in front of my nephew and accused me of something that wasn't true. And I got up from the table and left because I was like, you don't get to speak to me that way. And I went outside because I'm curious what you would say about this. And we can put this around holidays too. So I went outside, and then my mother came out and said, oh, you're being too sensitive. And I was like, that's your opinion, not mine. This is my boundary. But in that moment, I did not have the consciousness that he wasn't crossing my boundaries. So can you just and maybe you can move that into holidays, and then I'll ask the other question, how do we become aware that the person's not crossing our boundaries if they're saying something so rude? I kind of get what you're saying, but I'd like you to break it down a little bit, and then maybe give us a little bit about holidays and how we could handle this when those things happen, because there will be triggers.
Right. And it goes back to the sense of that, okay, first of all, and this is just the basic, perspective of everybody's living from their own shit.
Yeah.
Whatever he's spewing is from his own wounds. And whatever's hurting us is from our wounds.
I agree.
So when we understand that, it makes it makes it easier in the sense of allowing yourself to say, okay, I know I'm triggered. And we all get triggered. I mean, it's not like you don't get triggered. But instead of lashing out or coming back with something hurtful to him, I know enough in myself that I'm not going to put up with that behavior. So yes, I can leave, or I can simply have a statement, in order to take care of myself, I will not have this conversation with you right now, or whatever it may be. because you're not making it about that other person per se. It's about you standing in your truth. And your truth is, I'm not going to let somebody talk to me that way. So what are the options that I have where I can still stand in my truth? So I don't come back and this is our natural desire for most of us to be like, oh, well, I'm going to tell you about you, or I'm going to say something nasty to you, and all that does, energetically, it's one thing feeding the other. So, Marilyn, I mean, for you is you did what worked for you. And that's what the important thing is. And we have to recognize that in those situations, it's okay to walk away. Where I think a lot of us feel like we can't just walk away, or we have to engage instead of simply saying, I'm not going there with you, and leave, because that is not the behavior that most people are used to or expect of us. And what happens is a lot of the time, and I don't know your brother, but that pisses them off even more. Yeah. Because you have said or stated basically, not going to put up with this. So I'm just leaving.
Yeah, I have found that it's gotten, that was a long time ago, but it's gotten easier because once you start setting that boundary, it's funny how they'll just start like noticing it. And then it's like one quick thing and the trigger goes away. But it's very interesting because it's really a conversation with self at that moment.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's what's important. So how would you, because this is all about empowerment to me, Monique, empowering yourself. I have one more question. Let me ask this before we go into holidays, and then we're going to open up to Q&A in the membership program. But can somebody have too many boundaries then? Like, can you tilt over?
Well, okay. I don't want to say you could have too many boundaries. What I'll say is they can be too restrictive in the sense that if you make everything black and white, and I'll give you an example. For me, and Marilyn knows my food situation, because food is, for me, is like part of my healing. It's part of my medicine. And I have a hard time literally around when I have to eat. That is a hard boundary for me. In this, when I say hard, I don't mean difficult. I mean, I have to eat a certain period or I go down. So that is what I call a non-negotiable. Now, there are foods that my body really wants and needs. Now, if I tweak that a little bit, I try to live that every day, but there are days where I'm going to say, no, I want a little extra of that, or I want some gluten or whatever it is that I usually don't eat. I'm going to allow myself that space to do that. And even though I have a boundary around, I'm just going to say gluten, around not eating gluten. For me, I don't have celiac, or it doesn't put me into some kind of horrible reaction. I'm going to allow myself the time and the space to sometimes have that pleasure of a piece of bread or a piece of pasta, whatever. So it's, again, recognizing what is a non-negotiable boundary, because it is, harmful, let's say, as opposed to a boundary that just makes my life easier. And again, that is getting back to really recognizing who we are. And this is why boundaries are so important, because they make you meet yourself. They make you start to understand who you are, what you want, and what's important to you. Because when we don't have them, none of it matters. It's as simple as someone could say, where do you want to go to eat? Oh, it doesn't matter to me. Well, does it really not matter to you? Or you just don't want to step into the place of having to make that decision? And there's a difference. And so those are like tiny boundaries you could put into place, I'm going to speak up when someone says, what do you want to eat? Or where do you want to go to eat? I'm going to say, these are my choices.
Yeah. No, I like that. And I like the lack of victimization. Like, it's making you it not be a victim.
Yeah.
And that, totally, I feel like is one of the most important conversations, because I'm very tired of seeing people say they're a victim to their circumstances. And there may be very, very difficult circumstances. But yet there's conversations and boundaries we can have with ourselves. So let's take that for a second. Say somebody's in a very difficult, like a caretaker. You were just a caretaker. So caretaking is very difficult sometimes. How were you able to have boundaries in a scenario like that, if you're taking care of, it's so hard because there's so many different scenarios. Like I'm thinking of parents with special needs kids, and you have to, that's everything you give them. And
it is. It's not easy. And it's not easy. And, it, so much of it goes back to the self-care practices that we have or don't have. And and I know we talk a lot about this in SFA. And, the thing about self-care is it doesn't have to be something complicated. It doesn't have to be something drawn out, but it could be a moment, just that moment. And I always talk about, for me, when I was so sick and I couldn't get outside because I couldn't go downstairs, that I have this wonderful tea I drink from Hawaii. It's grown on like the side of a mountain or something. And I would connect in like 2 minutes to the earth where that tea is grown. I would connect to the people that grow it and hand pick it and hand make it. And so that would give me this instant opening. And again, it's something I would do every day. I drink my tea every day. So when you start integrating your self-care into whatever you're already doing, it makes, particularly for people who are caregivers, it can really help you and give you that boost. But the thing about caregiving is so many of us, and I'm not talking about, I'm not a parent, so I can't talk about parents with children, but I can talk about a child with elderly parents. We convince ourselves nobody else can do it.
Yeah.
Nobody else can help, or no one else understands, or we can't get help in here because of whatever. And those are all stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
And so once we start doing that, again, we start limiting ourselves and shrinking. And so it's recognizing that there are always options and ways. It doesn't mean it's always going to be easy, but whether it's asking someone, a relative, a friend, a neighbor, could you cook a meal for me? Could you come in and sit with my mother for an hour? Or, part of it's investigating what's available to people, medically or whatever. But it's recognizing that we don't, again, it's back to saving. We are not there to save people.
I love that we're not there to save people. And I also love the self-care, because that is a boundary in and of itself. And when you have those self-care boundaries in place, it helps you to navigate your life better, I find.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the holidays before we stop the conversation and go over to the Q&A.
Okay.
Because this is a really important conversation. And I like the way you describe it. And I also like the responsibility of it.
Yeah.
So what's some tips or techniques or how you could help people during the holidays with boundaries?
Well, it's funny because boundaries for me in the holidays, I call it the 3 F's. It's family, food, and festivities. And, first of all, my recommendation for everyone is to take a step back and really spend, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, what are your expectations? Because the holidays bring up so many different expectations for people, whether it's our own, whether it's our family, whether it's friends. And so we're all living in this state of expectation. But what do we really, really want? And that is such an important thing, because most of us say, oh, well, it's the family get together, so I have to go. Or, Aunt Carol is throwing the Christmas Eve, whatever. So no. I'm asking you to decide what it is you really want. And if it's participating, you can participate. If it's not participating, or participating differently, these are options we all have. And I don't think we all recognize that. And it's the same thing about food. When it comes to, so many of us around the holidays, like, it's that we binge and we splurge. And then after, like, oh, what have we done? What have I done? And that, again, we can become really conscious about, how is food serving me over the holidays? Is it something I'm using to placate my emotions? is there a boundary I need to put in place simply around, okay, I will allow myself, one dessert, or I will allow myself whatever it is, one serving, or I won't have any, whatever it is. It's just, it's about your relationship to what you put in your mouth and how you nourish yourself, because it doesn't change because it's the holiday season. And I think so many of us fall into those traps of it's the holidays, so everything, the self-care, everything goes out the window. I mean, we could still have, foods that we may not usually eat. We can still drink for those who drink. We can still be with family, but at the same time, if it's things that are not bringing us joy or making us feel good or nourishing ourselves, then I really suggest you take a step back and see what is out of alignment for you in those areas.
Yeah. It's really becoming more, as you're talking, boundaries around self-care is so important. Like it is, boundaries are self-care.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They start with all self-care. Because again, every boundary, it's between you and you. It's not between you and anyone else, or even you and the food. It's between you and you. So what are you doing? And I can tell you in my practice with my clients, we talk about what are your daily practices? How are you? Where are you in your daily practices? And if you're not where you want to be, what's getting in the way? And let's look at what's getting in the way and why it's getting in the way. Because the self-care is where it all starts. And self-care is not caring for other people in the sense of trying to fix, trying to make them happy, trying to, all the things we've talked about. That is not self-care.
Yeah.
But let me just say one other quick thing, because this is really important. When we say no, where are we saying no from? Are we saying no from that place of the empowerment of saying, I know, like, for instance, I won't get in a car with someone who's been drinking. That is, again, a hard no for me. I know I am saying that from a place of truth and a place of certainty. But there are other instances, though, where we say no because we want to get back at somebody. And there's a huge difference. So I really want people to recognize that when you say no, where are you saying it from? And if you're saying it from the place of, I just told them no, look at me. That is not a place of expansion, and that is not a boundary. That is a place of restriction. And that is not a place of self-love or self-care.
I agree.
So anyway, yes.
And I also feel like when you get very strong in your boundaries, you don't have to explain it either. It's yeah.
Oh no, and I can tell you, I go deep into that with my clients. No explanations necessary. And that's what I teach. No is a full sentence, period. No. Because here's the deal. When we say yes to people, do we go on and on? No, we don't give we just say yes and it ends. No is the same way. When I say no, I say no. I don't apologize to you, and I don't need to give you an explanation. But that takes a lot of work, Marilyn, I have to tell you, because that is not how we're wired. That's not how we're raised. And that takes a lot of practice.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what I had to do early on, like with one of my other brothers, which a therapist recommended, and I thought it was very good. When we had a neutral conversation, I had to say to him, when you do such and such, I'm just letting you know I'm going to hang up the phone.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Right.
And then the situation happened. I said, this is the moment where I'm hanging up, which I've told you about. And I hung up. And sometimes, like just with certain people that we love, we may have to have that conversation in a neutral territory because they're not used to the boundary, like we've said before.
Right.
But yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and that's what's so important is that when you tell someone about your boundary, it's not usually in the state of chaos or in the state of anger. It is in that neutral state. But you have done the work beforehand to know this is my boundary. So when I get, and I had that with my family, that I finally sat down when it was in a quiet, neutral place saying, here's my boundary. I need to leave town in order for me to take care of my health. But I couldn't do that when we were in the midst of, you're not doing this or you're doing this or whatever. So yes, it's finding the best time and the best place to present your boundaries.
Yeah. And I like how you said, like, you have to know where that's coming from. Like saying the no is a period, because when you're explaining to your family, I'm going to leave town, they may be like, you can't, da, 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 whatever the conversation is. But when you've set the boundary inside yourself in a really solid place, not fighting it, battling it, it just, for me, it's like, well, that's what I've decided. So that's it.
Yeah. So that's it. End of conversation.
Yeah. I don't get into it.
And it doesn't mean it doesn't come up again. That's the thing, because again, you're certain where you are, but the other person isn't. So like my father has called me multiple times, God love him, since I left, saying, I know I'm not supposed to talk to you about this, but have you talked to the realtor or whatever? And I will say, Daddy, you need to talk to sibling X about that. I am no longer involved. I know. So it's just being very, very calm, but also very firm, because you sometimes do have to repeat it, because the other people with whom you're in relationship are not accustomed to that.
Yeah. So how would you summarize like a little bit of what they could do until your amazing lesson comes out in February? What would you want to say to everybody as a summarization?
Well, I think, first of all, the most important thing is to check your self-care practices. And if you don't have any in place, why? And then start putting something in place that's doable, that's manageable. Not that someone told you to do. It's your own practice that you can get to every day. Because once you start putting that boundary in place with yourself, when it starts becoming the situation with other people or other circumstances, you already know what it feels like to have a boundary of self-care in place. So it will just extend to the more complicated relationships in your life. So I cannot stress how important those self-care practices are. And then the second thing is, the next time you feel anger or resentment or anything of that nature, take some breaths, take a step back, check in with your body and see what it's telling you.
How can they find you, and what is something that you offer so that everybody knows?
I know you put my website, which is moniquegarsaud.com. And, right now I'm really focusing on boundary coaching. I'm not doing anything until January, but I offer 30-minute free sessions just as an introductory to see if we would work well together. But I'm also doing a group boundary coaching in February, which will be good because it's not the one-on-one, and the price point comes down a little more, and you get this group coaching. You're with several other people, and that's how I learned. That's how I was coached. So I'll be doing that too.
That's great. When are you doing that?
That will be in February.
Oh, definitely. So can people email you to find out about that as well?
Yes, because I have nothing on my website about that right now. But yes, they can email me at care@moniquegarsaud.com.
Great. And you have a contact form on the website too. I love that.
Yes, they can fill that out. Yeah.
I feel like a group would be so incredible because you're going to learn from each other's stories, boundaries you don't even think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we are each other's best teachers, because we're all so connected in life, and whatever's happening in someone else's life is also probably happening in yours. So yeah. This has been awesome, Marilyn. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Monique. We're going to go. So I'm going to stop the live on Facebook, and we're going to take some questions over in Membership for Your Soul. If you guys are interested in joining Membership for Your Soul, Monique is doing a class that is coming out in February, but we have a great class coming out in December and January. I can't remember what December is. And then I know we have something with Jenny Lynn in January, and I believe yours is coming out in February, right? Yeah.
Mine will be February. Yeah.
And that's going to be boundaries for empaths, which this conversation was so important about. And that's going to be the class. You can go to membershipforyoursoul.com. I don't think you can join there. Actually, you have to go to joinsoul.com to join Soul. All right, Monique. Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Everyone.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Bye.
Bye.